Hey everyone, how's it going? Today's review is going to be a bit interesting, as this comic was actually adapted to a film that was probably one of last year's biggest animated movies. No, not that one. No, not that one. No, not that one. No, not even that one. I ain't gonna risk crossing Miyazaki. Anyway, I was talking about Nimona, the last of Blue Sky's animated films, and one of the many examples of studio execs shooting themselves in the foot because they're scared of taking chances. Because heads up, I will be spoiling major moments from the film, along with stuff from the comic, so I'd suggest to stop this video now and watch the film, as I do recommend checking it out. The film told the tale of a kingdom that was a combination of both fantasy and sci-fi, where a commoner by the name of Ballister Boldheart defied the odds and became a knight, but during his ceremony, he ended up being framed for the queen's murder. While on the run, Ballister would meet a powerful shapeshifter by the name of Nimona, who declares herself his sidekick and ready to raise some hell. And hell they do raise, as they clear his name, face off against the knights, one of them being Ballister's love interest, a knight by the name of Ambrosius, and learn the truth of the kingdom's history. Of course, there's a lot more going on, but I'll discuss that in the actual review itself. As for the source material, it started out as a webcomic on Tumblr from 2012 to 2014, and eventually got an official publication in 2015. Nimona the comic, like its film adaptation, was nominated for 5 awards, and won 3 of them, one of which was the best webcomic in 2012. Did it earn its title? Well, let's dive into Nimona and find out. Warning spoilers. Our story begins in media res as we see Nimona meeting Ballister, who in here has the not so subtle last name of Blackheart, and is currently planning his next big scheme. First big difference from the film and the book is that while in the film Ballister's innocence was very clear, and we're rooting for him immediately to clear his name, this is a bit of a misdirection, as Ballister is actually seen doing villainous acts. Nimona also mentions an agency who she claims sent her. More on that in a bit. But she's lying, and turns out that she's just a fan of his who wants to help. He of course refuses, since she seems to be just a kid, but the instant she reveals herself to be a shapeshifter, he decides to keep her around, believing her to be able to help him out with his schemes. But he starts to regret this, as when he's explaining his plan, which was also a subtle way to reveal that this world was a fusion of fantasy meets science, Ballister reveals that he has devised a scheme to release an army of genetically modified dragons during a parade to hold both the people and the king hostage. But Nimona is more focused on using the dragons to attack the people and murder the king. Yeah, you can probably guess who changed the least in this adaptation. Ballister tells Nimona that that isn't how he works and that there are rules. Nimona doesn't understand and tries to at least be allowed to kill the knight trying to stop them, Sir Ambrose Goldenloins, but Ballister shuts that down, claiming that if anyone was going to kill him, it'd be him. Like in the film, they were both promising knights and were friends, though unlike the film where they were romantically involved, besides some suggestive imagery, the book's a little bit more vague. But that all stopped on the day of the joust, where after beating Ambrosius, it seemed that in anger he shot Ballister, completely removing his arm. While Ambrosius just got slapped in the wrist, Ballister was kicked out of the knighthood, leading him to realize that the organization is less like the knights of the classic fantasy stories, and more like how actual knights were most likely in the medieval era. On their first mission, we see firsthand that Ambrosius is more focused on playing a hero and fighting Ballister, while he's more focused on stopping Nimona from going on a killing spree. At first looking at their plans as a failure, but Nimona revealed that she was able to get her hands on the kingdom's secret plans. Meanwhile, Ambrosius meets with the director, who already is not happy that the plans were stolen, with Ambrosius stating that Ballister cheated. Yeah, let's talk about that. Turns out Ballister's title as a villain is more like an actual position. Though his fights are very real, Ambrosius and the director pretty much treat what he does as a way of making the knights look good. It's kind of like the Guild of Calamus Intent from Venture Brothers. They're essentially fencing, focusing more of the art of it, though that changes as the director learns about Nimona and is pissed, as she can help Ballister get an edge on the fight, and that can make him a true threat to them, which immediately happens as Ballister and Nimona break into one of their labs and discovers the organization has been experimenting with Jade Root, a very rare but dangerous plant that has only been used for black magic and is very unstable. What do they plan to use it for? Will Ballister and Nimona be able to uncover the truth within this world of magic, monsters, and science with the help of a scientist character named Blitzmeyer, who I kinda want in the movie, and how different will the story be by comparison of the movie? Well, the first 3 you're gonna have to read to find out, but I'll just say now, by a lot. But still, same where it counts. This comic is much darker and more complicated by by comparison of the film. I actually was struggling abridging the story synopsis as there's so much happening, but still carries the same themes and essence that you're able to tell that this is still Nimona. The comic was written and illustrated by N.D. Stevenson, and a lot of comic fans would know for his comic series Lumberjanes, but animation fans will know him as the creator and showrunner of Netflix's She-Ra, Princesses of Power. He wrote Nimona as part of a class assignment and even became his thesis, so you can probably guess that he took his time with his characters, even more than he originally planned, as he's gone on record saying that Nimona actually helped him come out as trans. In fact, the Nimona comic has been seen as a metaphor for coming out as someone in the LGBTQ plus community, though at least in the book leans more towards people who are coming out as trans or non-binary, especially when it comes to Nimona and the director's stories. But to get more into that, we gotta talk about the characters, starting with the shape-shifting master of disaster herself, Nimona. As I said, she's probably the least changed out of the cast. She's chaotic, she's manic, she loves ultraviolence to the almost scary degree, but she's also caring and loving to her friends, and really hope that they'll understand her, though of course hides a sadness within her caused by a broken heart. The only big difference is that in the book, it's actually darker, as she is way more quick to kill, more distrusting, as she doesn't like to talk about the extent of her powers or her past, and the heartbreak she suffered in the comic is due to her parents who, after gaining her powers, believed their daughter to be a monster in disguise and sent her away to be experimented on, unlike the film, where it was being portrayed by her childhood friend to really push her. The way they tell the backstory is meant to represent how some parents will just disconnect to their children when they come out, as they don't want to accept that their daughter could be magical, and just dismiss her as being a monster posing as their daughter. The fantasy equivalent of, "that's not the child I raised" mentality. Nimona in both comic and film is a character who wants to belong but gets punished for just being herself, and that's why we root for her, and see why she comes to help Ballister. Speaking of Ballister, as you can guess, is very different from his film counterpart. Besides the fact that he straight up embraces his role as a villain, while in the film is constantly denying that, this Ballister is also more of a scientist, as he's constantly experimenting and building new inventions to use on his missions, like the mutated dragons, and later a laser cannon he builds to fight off the enemy. He's also more cold to people, as though he doesn't want Nimona killing people, he's also not really reprimanding her for it. He's also less willing to let people in, as when he first met Nimona, he was willing to work with her only because of her powers. It's only until later he starts to see her as a friend, or is even trusting of other people, like when he goes to get the help of Dr. Blitzmeyer, more on her in a bit. And I'll discuss a bit more with Ambrosia's character, but as you can guess, he's not as torn fighting his former friend and possible ex, given the fact that he blew his arm off seemingly out of jealousy. The only thing that him and his film counterpart have in common is a sense of chivalry and honor that his fellow knights lack, and the almost big brother relationship that he and Nimona have, and a drive to take down the director when he realizes how cruel she truly is. Ballister might call himself a villain, but with Nimona's help, he's definitely proven wrong. Next we got Ambrosius, and man, he's probably the most changed when it comes to adaptation. While the film kind of depicted him as a kind-hearted and dutiful knight who struggles to face off against the one he loves, this guy is kind of a vain himbo. He's an asshole who refused to acknowledge what happened to Ballister was his fault, and just expects him to just continue being his arch nemesis as a way to keep him relevant. The relationship is less tragic romance and more of that ex who keeps expecting you to be grateful to them because they got you a job despite the fact it's their fault you got fired in the first place. Now, Ambrosius is not without his redeeming qualities. As the story progresses, he does begin to realize that though he is not totally responsible for what happened that day, he still has responsibility that he has to take. Plus, despite the fact that he will deny multiple times to Ballister in the beginning that it was not his fault, he does show moments of actually feeling guilty and even refuses to hurt him in any serious way. Also, as the story goes on, we do see that though the director is willing to hurt civilians, he is not. He does show some legit guilt and concern for the citizens, something that Ballister believes that knights should do. Next, we got a character who, despite me only mentioning in the tail end of the synopsis and only showing up halfway in the book, I'm just gonna mention her because she was tons of fun. That being Dr. Meredith Blitzmeyer, a scientist who helped Ballister and Nimona after meeting her at a science expo. She's a fun, mad scientist-esque character who is interested in figuring out where science ends and magic begins. Yeah, there's a point where she feels like an exposition machine, like when Ballister asked her to help learn more about the history of the world, but even then, she's kind of fun where just finds it so fascinating when she learns something new and you can't help but be happy for her. I was bummed she wasn't in the film, but hey, that's something that the book does have over the film. Finally, we got our main antagonist, the director, who, unlike the film, whose actions are driven by fear and paranoia along with the obvious prejudice of the lower class, this. The book version is more driven by power control and possibly self-loathing. Yes, she still has her hatred towards monsters and a dislike of the lower class, though it's less of a dislike and more of a, well, they're servants, so I can do whatever I want with them. As for her hatred of monsters, well, like I said, there's a bit of a self-loathing element to her character. Unlike the film director, who's never seen without her headdress, we do in the book, revealing that she's both bald and has pointy ears, which definitely seems odd, and later Nimona even asks if she's a goblin, with a very questionable reaction. This has led to many to see her as a representation of those who hate others because they can't accept themselves. She sees Nimona as everything she hates because she is what she hates. But while she calls Nimona a monster and claims to be doing this to help the kingdom, all she does is spread poison, both figuratively and literally, with her experiments. She is all a big bad to our heroes. Andy Stevenson did the art, and it's very simplistic with a very old school children's book vibe, which makes sense as when the story begins, it does start out very simplistic and innocent, with Nimona seeing Ballister and Ambrosius as the very standard hero/villain story. But as the story goes on, the art does get more complicated and have imagery that starts to resemble old illustrations from folklore, though with some designs inspired by classic sci-fi comics for the technology aspect of the story. Very similar to stuff like Adventure Time, however, I will admit the style isn't for everyone, and it could come off as a bit off-putting for some people. On a whole, Nimona is a pretty fun comic, and definitely see why this would get adapted. Now, which one I prefer, the book or the film? I'm kind of going for the book, since though the film is amazing and I still recommend it, the book has layers that the film unfortunately wouldn't be able to cover. But what do you guys think? Do you prefer the book or the film, and why? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't read the book but love the film, or are just looking for an interesting story of sci-fi and fantasy, I definitely recommend checking it out. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for updates. Next time we follow the themes of a duo, but settle their conflicts in the arena. And oh yeah, animal-human hybrids. Later.